Yes, folks, New Zealand children will soon be forced to learn Te Reo. Now, Te Reo is the Maori language, for those who don't know. And this will happen regardless of whether parents want this to happen or not. And of course, some radical Maori will argue that this is justified because they had their language stripped away from them. And they did have their language stripped away from them. But that simply doesn't justify the forcing of an unwanted language on the majority of New Zealanders. But like everything else in this socialist country, this is all about identity politics. The only reason this is happening is because Maori are owned by Jacinda Ardern et al. They are one of her so-called victim groups after all. Anyway, today I'll start this off with the following comment. Yeah, so this comment is by Silver Wings. Terry, I wonder if you would consider doing a video about the government's plan to give more than $12 million this year to enforce Te Reo, while at the same time cutting back funding on much needed home care for the sick and elderly. Apparently our kind and loving government thinks learning a language that no one wants to learn and is irrelevant outside New Zealand is more important than our health and well-being. Yes, this is absolutely ironic, isn't it? Our so-called health and well-being government is more concerned about identity politics than health and well-being. Yeah, now Silver Wings is absolutely correct there. This government is wasting your hard-earned tax dollars on this nonsense when there are far more important things to fund. Now, let's go and see how sincere our dear leader is about this language she is forcing on you.
The Prime Minister paid a special visit to students at Wellington High School this morning to celebrate, and a group of about 50 teenagers were given the chance to ask Jacinda Ardern questions. Among them was how Te Reo would be a part of the life of her daughter, Neve Te Aroha.
Clark and I have only had very early discussions. We're only 12 weeks in, but we've certainly got the books to be able to ensure that she's learning Te Reo even through her early story time. But yes, we'll have to have a discussion about how it is that we make sure that she has that access and learns a language we never learnt.
So she never learnt the language. She never learnt the language herself, but she's quite happy to force it on your children, to force it on you.
That is Jacinda Ardern speaking to students at Wellington High School. Another student asked whether she thought there would ever be a Prime Minister who could speak Maori. Ms Ardern said she wished she could have been the first leader of the country to have that ability.
You know, I am part of a generation that didn't routinely learn Te Reo Māori.
So she is part of a generation that didn't routinely learn Te Reo. And that's her excuse. What a lot of crap. She didn't learn it because she didn't want to learn it. There's nothing stopping anyone learning any language in New Zealand. She is just a fake. Anyway, now to Kelvin Davis.
Quite a bit has changed since Kelvin Davis roamed around Kawakawa as a teenager. He's a lot more comfortable in his own skin for one, and a big part of that comes with the decision as a 13-year-old to learn Te Reo.
I would never say I was a fluent speaker of Māori, and I'm always conscious when I stand up to speak that I probably sound like somebody who's learnt the language, but the big thing is I'm standing up and I'm using it.
Davis had to learn because his father didn't know and couldn't teach him. And while he's sympathetic to the call for a Crown apology, he believes the fault in his own whānau came closer to home.
I actually blame my grandparents because they were of the mind that it's going to be a Pākehā world, learn English. That's the language of the future, and how wrong they were.
No, Kelvin, they weren't wrong. They were right. English is the language of the future. And it is now the default language, or the default international language as well. Yeah, now I also have another problem with the teaching of Te Reo, and that is this. All of these WH place names are all spelt incorrectly. They're either spelt incorrectly or they are pronounced incorrectly. And Maori insist, for example, say Wongamata, they insist on pronouncing it Whangamata. So they must be spelt incorrectly. Now teachers are going into classrooms now telling students they must pronounce Maori words correctly, with no consideration given to the wrong English spelling of these words. Now on the one hand, kids are told to pronounce WH words like what, when, where and why, etc. with a W sound. In other words, they're told to pronounce them exactly how they're spelt. And then they're told to pronounce words like Wakatani with an F sound, as in Whakatani. In other words, pronounce them differently than how they're spelt. Now these words are not only degrading our English language, they also pose a problem for tourists. Now, just imagine you're a tourist and you've been told Whangamata or Whakatani is a great place to visit, and then you search for it on a map and it doesn't exist. So you search around for Whangamata and you can't find it because it's spelt Wongamata. And the same applies to Wakatani. You search for Whakatani on the map and it doesn't exist because Wakatani is how it is spelt. And this applies to all tourist maps, all maps. They're all the same. And the same applies to words like whānau. You can't find the word whānau in a dictionary under F because it's listed under W. Now this is really degrading our language, but the left don't care about that. Now folks, I can completely understand Maori wanting to learn their own language. Now if I were in their shoes, I would probably want to learn it myself as well. But the reality is this: no one can force anyone to learn a language they don't want to learn. And besides that, our kids are struggling with the basics as it is. Now, if Maori want to learn their language, and I would encourage them to do so, it's the right thing to do, but they must fund it for themselves.